But how do you run a country, Tobias? That's the whole problem. I mean, given the fact that the British, the Russians, the Indians, the people of the Middle East, they've been in Afghanistan for around about 300, 400 years, and the great game has been going for a very long time. We're back to square one. How do you administer a country so that it does not collapse into chaos?
Okay, well, you're hit on another issue that I think is unfortunately, as Western societies, we're all too quick to try and enforce a Western style of liberal democracy, and that's been very much led by the American neoconservative movement, if you like, in the early 2000s. That kind of Western perception of what a democracy should look like is not going to work for everyone. Now, if you're going in somewhere like Afghanistan, which is entirely tribally based, well, again, it's not going to work because you're enforcing something which isn't culturally specific. So I think in the future, the biggest lessons that could be learned in how to conduct operations like this are being more culturally aware and sensitive before you go into somewhere and having a think about how you might try and help democracy flourish. Democracies in India, in the UK, in the US took hundreds of years to get to the point where they are now. You can't force it as quickly as we'd like to think you can. In terms of solving Afghanistan, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be an entirely governable place for a long time to come. But I think for the future, we need to really think about, what our definitions and expectations are of democracy when we go into these places in the first place.
Tobias, you brought about this refreshing insight on the interlinkages of security and the ecology, the environmental movement. Can you shed more light on that for our viewers?
Sure. I mean, at RUSI, we've been looking at the linkages between climatic change and security in certain regions of the world. With the firming up of the climate science data, aside from the leaked emails and people trying to discredit it, we're pretty much sure that humans are having an impact on the climate and the warming of the globe. What we try and do is understand how this is going to act as a threat multiplier in already fragile regions of the world. And something that really interests us is understanding how already weak and fragile states, with the additional stress factor of maybe increased temperatures, increased rainfall, flooding, typhoons and extreme weather conditions, how will that further begin to tear apart that country? How will it further weaken a government's ability to actually maintain control? And that's on, the extremity. So we really, the issues that we look at are kind of localized conflict over water shortages, food shortages. You've seen many examples around the globe in the last 2 years because of food price increases, rapid food price increases. It affects disproportionately those who are least able to cope with that kind of price hike. And therefore it's led to rioting in a lot of countries around the world, civil disturbance. And those are the kind of linkages we look at. Really, it's about civil disturbance and localized conflict over shortages of resources and extremity of condition.
Can the Naxalite movement in India be studied along the same lines, given the fact that they're seen as an oppressed lot? And given the fact that even though we are a democracy, a truly representative democracy in many ways, yet that we've not been able to reach out to the Naxalites in a big way. Is it possible that there is a framework or an architecture that can study this Naxal movement in that way and bring these gentlemen home in a way that, in a more approachment-friendly way?
I firstly begin my response to that question by saying I don't claim to have the answers, and I would never suggest for an instant that I have the answers to the Indian government and how they respond to this issue. But from my understanding of the Naxalite issue, it's very much a case of alternative governance structures being set up where rural governance is not working and where local policing structures aren't strong enough, aren't given the right resource and don't have the right levels of respect from the public, that the Naxalites therefore move in and create alternative structures of governance for the people. So, and it's often the way that actually, insurgencies begin is through this setting up of alternative structures to those that the government provide or don't provide. I think it's very much an issue of government trying to re-establish itself in rural areas. Now, obviously, to a degree, because the Naxalites have quite a harsh judicial system of their own, and they're also quite violent in the way that they will deal with government forces and people under their protection, if you like. There's difficulties in the way that this is responded to. There's got to be a certain level of violence to meet violence, if you like. But actually, I think fundamentally at the root cause of it is the government's need to begin to re-establish itself at the rural level, root out areas of maybe bits of corruption within those areas, reinforce the police forces that are there, give them better social standing, and essentially retake the ground that the Naxalites have in providing governance. And I think that's the real nub of the problem with the Naxalite movements.
Coming back to the questions on ecology and security. Now, suppose a typhoon or a tornado, there's a massive natural cataclysm in, say, Bangladesh. Large low-lying areas, almost below sea level, and millions of refugees are pushed out. Do you study that sort of scenario? Are you gaming for that sort of scenario?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to be honest with you, Bangladesh is one of the most frequently used examples of what could happen in the event of catastrophic climate change. There's the potential for kind of 25 million. I think it's a 1.6 meter sea level rise by 2050 would mean somewhere in the region of 25 million Bangladeshis being displaced. And it's about where would those individuals go? Well, now with the extent of the flooding, they would look for alternative areas that they can sustain themselves. Now I know already, India has quite a large number of Bangladeshi migrants who move in through the northeast in Assam, where you already have a certain amount of instability already within Assam, a long-standing, I don't know how you describe that, conflict, if you like, but that's certainly destabilised further that situation. Now, if you begin to think about millions of individuals, if indeed it was at that level, come through the border in the northeast, well then that could lead to quite dramatic impacts. So, we've looked at that to a degree. And interestingly, I don't think it's any coincidence that India has substantially physically reinforced its border on that region to try and stem the flow already of Bangladeshi migrants. So yes, no, absolutely. It's a case study that we look at. It's a scenario that many people look at because Bangladesh already suffers a huge amount of flooding.
And finally, Dr. Feakin, we would like to know, Security Watch, for instance, has launched a Secure Delhi initiative, which, like the CSIR in the UK, what they've done in cities in the UK, like London, Manchester, we are trying to get people from the government, from the public sector, the private sector, schools, colleges, all onto a common platform to debate these issues and to evolve guidelines and to work together. Do you endorse an initiative like this? Do you see potential?
Well, no, absolutely. I think it's the only way to do it. As I think earlier I said, as part of that broadening security discussion, it needs to be realised that actually security involves so many different people, and to secure a city, if you like, it demands the goodwill of the people, those that govern the people, businesses involved. You need to get that range of stakeholders in to make them realise that they have a role in security themselves. They have to take a bit of responsibility themselves as much as the government providing that responsibility, having that responsibility to look after its people. And I think it's an absolutely positive, initiative that's been begun here.